geeks and geekettes. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gats and gittens, comic book fans from all over the world, welcome back to another thrill-packed, information-seeking episode of Ask Chuck Dixon, where we crack the seams, we break the seals, and open up the enormous book of comic book knowledge and insider information that I offer to you weekly. And all you have to do is ask me a question about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. Let's not waste one more second of your precious time. We have a new segment here called Ajax Asks. Mostly because I just wanted to make this graphic. Ajax Plunkett. Man, Ajax, what a cool name. Mr. Dixon, straight talk, don't hold back. Was there ever a case you saw firsthand that the inker, an unsung, underappreciated comics creator of a comic, repaired, fixed, or practically penciled the whole book to salvage it from looking bad? Is it possible the inker can compensate for less than good quality penciled artwork in the comics medium? Example, names. So the first one that comes to mind for me is Ricardo Villagran. There are many others, Klaus Jensen, Tom Palmer. They can be brought in to embellish, to fix, to repair, to make better, to make not bad weak pencils. Maybe some newbie breaking in doesn't have quite the chops yet. And an inker like that, an inker finisher, Eduardo Barreto, guys like that could come in. But the guy that I first met, the inker that I first became familiar with and became friends with, Ricardo Villagran. My Argentino amigo ran the Villagran studios in Buenos Aires, inked hundreds and hundreds of comics here in the United States, drew thousands upon thousands of pages for the UK market, for the Argentine comic market. Just a master inker, master painter, and a hell of a penciler as well, which is what makes him a great inker. And he is a legend in Argentina, and quite rightfully so. And when I first met him, he was staying in a little hotel room in New York, inking pages of Star Trek, which I will get into in a little more detail. And I was fascinated. He would talk because he'd taken on so much work, he didn't have time to stop inking. So if I met with him, I had to talk to him while he inked. Which, okay, I understand that. Driven professional. And he's sitting at one of those little, tables they give you in a hotel room. Not even a drawing table. And he's just inking away. And it's just this sure, steady hand. It was like watching a concert violinist play. And he was correcting pencils in ink. He was making the ears the right shape, the jawline, correcting perspective. And then, once that was done, going in and adding, drop shadows and feathering and shading. And, oh, man, it was a joy to watch this guy. I mean, he would work on a face, and if the eyes weren't level, he'd make them level in ink. I mean, no preliminary drawing. What guts does it take? Take a brush and just dip it in ink and just go to it. Could never have that level of confidence. That's why I could never ink. I just didn't have that hand. And Ricardo had that hand. I never saw this guy make a mistake. I never saw this guy reach for a bottle of whiteout. Just absolutely amazing. Now let's get down to it. You want to name names. Tom Sutton. Tom Sutton, one of my favorite comic book artists, and I think one of the most underrated comic book artists, American comic book artists of all time. I love Tom Sutton's work, but it's idiosyncratic. Tom had a lot of mojo. He had plenty of fist, but he was mostly mojo. He's like my friend Flint Henry. There was an enthusiasm there that carried the work past his obvious flaws. But mostly he had a style unique to him. And that's cool. But then they put him on a book like Star Trek. It didn't make a lot of sense. And most fans didn't think, hey, we love Tom Sutton, but it didn't make any sense to put him on Star Trek. Why did they do that? I don't know. Maybe he was buddies with the editor. Maybe he would work for a lower page rate. Maybe he was a huge Star Trek fan and just begged for the job. Nothing, absolutely nothing against Tom Sutton, but he didn't seem suited for a book like Star Trek, which would require likenesses and drawing sleek spacecraft. There was something lived in and used up about Tom Sutton's world when he drew, and it just wasn't Star Trek. The sterile environment of Star Trek didn't match, Tom Sutton's, crunchy inking style and sort of, throw it against the wall, penciling style. And I guess DC recognized this and they brought in Ricardo to ink him. And Ricardo would basically redraw Tom Sutton. And I remember him sitting there with 8x10s of all the actors. And he would nail the likenesses, and he didn't mind. In fact, he said to me, I like Tom Sutton. He has good ideas. And I found out that was an Argentine artist's way of saying you're a good storyteller. Because I would hear this over and over again from various Argentine artists. Oh, that artist, he has good ideas, which means he's a good storyteller. And so, but Ricardo knew his job was to make this look more palatable to Star Trek fans, make the actors look more like themselves, make the world look more like what was presented in the movies and the TV series. And that's what he did. And he did an incredible job for a long time. These guys were a powerhouse team. Books sold well. Fans were happy. I was certainly happy. This was a good comic. I think it was Mike Barr writing, and he really nailed the voices. If you've never checked out these early DC Star Trek comics, I think they're the best Star Trek comics that had ever been done. But that's just my opinion. But that's what you come here for, my opinion. All right, Twin Spin. Ajax has more questions. Ajax Plunkett again. In the past, you have revealed a dislike of a few now considered classic graphic novels written by some well-known comics writers, Dark Knight Returns, Watchmen. But is there a graphic novel or comics run you did not like, but in retrospect, and perhaps sometime going by, thought it was very good work, or even come to like it on a second read? Examples? I don't dislike Watchmen or Dark Knight Returns. I understand Watchmen. I appreciate why it was popular. The only thing I don't like about Watchmen is its ending. I thought its ending was weak. I thought the editor, this series switched editors midstream, and I think the second editor didn't have the nerve to go up against Alan Moore and basically say, look, you got to come up with a better ending than this. This is weak cheese. This ending it isn't good. I mean, you borrowed it from another medium, and it's just sort of lame. You got to come up with something stronger to match the rest of the series, because even though I don't agree with the politics and I don't agree with a lot of the tone, there's no taking away from Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons that this is a comic book storytelling landmark. I mean, they were at the top of their game doing excellent work. Even though I didn't care for some of what happened in the series, I recognize it as good, so I don't dislike it. I think the one I dislike is Killing Joke. I really dislike Killing Joke. Dark Knight Returns, I read it. I thought it was good. I thought, again, there were some things in it I disagreed with that I didn't particularly care for. But overall, you can't take it away from Frank Miller and Klaus Janson that this is, another comic book landmark. Now, for things like this, projects that came out way back when that I had a chance to reread, no, I can't think of any I changed my mind about. One that I read back in the day and liked, and recently reread the entire run and like even more, is Kirby's The Demon. Jack Kirby created the Demon when I just read about this recently. He had an obligation with DC to produce X amount of pages per month, and they were canceling New Gods and Forever People, so he had to jump in. And now, being Kirby, he already had a bazillion concepts in his mind ready to go in case the Fourth World books failed, and Demon was one of them. And I really enjoyed it, reading it back in the day, but I have a new appreciation for it reading it now. And my biggest takeaway is, people complained about Kirby as a writer. He was over the top. His syntax was weird sometimes, but boy, is it suited to Demon. Often when he worked with Jack Kirby, Kirby was a big aficionado of Shakespeare and would often, pull quotes or paraphrase Shakespeare in his stories, particularly Thor, or if Silver Surfer was talking, or characters like Galactus, it's a sort of stilted, iambic pentameter way of speaking like a Shakespearean actor. And that was all well and good. But Kirby learned from that, not from Shakespeare, but from Lee's writings. And he takes that in The Demon, and he sort of makes it more bombastic. And he actually makes it closer to I'm comparing Jack Kirby to Shakespeare. He takes his syntax, his phrasing, his choice of words closer to Shakespeare than what Stan Lee was doing. Not the actual quotes from Shakespeare, but the feel, the tone, the sort of who gives a damn way that Shakespeare wrote. I mean, Shakespeare would make up words. He would combine words no one had ever combined before. He would make phrases. He was helping invent the English language. He was helping establish the English language in his day. And here Kirby sort of riffs like Shakespeare does. And that's what Shakespeare was doing, is riffing with words. That's why we remember him above all of the other highly successful playwrights of his day. We remember Shakespeare because I know his stuff seems stilted and stodgy and everything else, but if you read it, really read it, man, he's just winging it. He's going crazy with phrasing and descriptive passages. And and Kirby's kind of riffing off that. He's riffing off of Lee by way of Shakespeare. And plus the stories are great. They're fun. Some of them are a little by the numbers, but the ones that are good are really, really good. And I love the character Clarion the Witch Boy. And there's a issue that I completely forgotten about, in which the bulk of the action takes place in Jason Blood's apartment. Jason Blood is the alter ego of the Demon. He's the human alter ego of the Demon. And Clarion the Witch Boy has trapped Jason Blood in his own apartment, is basically psychologically torturing him using magic. It's an awesome issue. And it's a demonstration of something that Kirby very rarely ever got to demonstrate, which was his ability to create a small scene and really pull the drama out of every little thing. It's an excellent example of his truly cinematic way of storytelling, which he didn't really get to do that often. But this was a great issue. I mean, for an issue that takes place mostly in 2 or 3 rooms, it's fascinating to see Kirby sort of confined to that space and still managing to bring that Kirby power to every panel. So, yeah, I can't think of anything from the 70s or 80s that I didn't like then that I still don't like. But the Demon rocks. Triple spin. Ajax is back, and he asks, if you were to go back in time but only could become a comic book writer, which decade would you go back to? The 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s? But at the end of 10 years, you would retire from comics to go into marketing or some other boring job, leaving your mark on comics for only 1 decade. I thought about this one, and I thought 60s. And I probably want to work at Marvel. I want to, show up, Mr. Lee, I can help you write those comic books. I got some ideas, and and get to work with, Kirby and Ditko and Don Heck and Gene Colan and John Buscema. I mean, how cool would that be? And to be part of Marvel's rise in the market, to be there for that energy, that nuclear reactor of creativity, and to be able, even for 10 years, just 10 years, say, I was a part of that. And those 10 years, if it was 60 to 70, I'd be there for the pre-superhero monster stuff. I'd probably be assigned to write Millie the Model, but I'd still be there. I'd still be there. Now, a better fit for me, actually in the 60s, might have been Thunder Agents. Of course, Thunder Agents didn't run for 10 years. But I would have dug working with Wally Wood and all those guys. That would have been fun because they were just sort of taking the superhero genre and just having fun with it. You know, doing sometimes goofy stories, but iconic stuff. I think I could have helped add maybe a little depth to those characters that they lacked. I don't know. But a really, really good fit for me and my skill set would have been Dell Comics. Dell Comics published everything from original comics of their own creation to licensed comics based on TV shows and movies and stuff like that. And everything from Westerns to detective to sword and sandal, science fiction, and funny animals. And guys like Gaylord Dubois and Paul S. Newman, you know, they wrote whatever was thrown at them. You know, it's like, hey, we licensed this new TV series. Here's the prospectus. Here's the outline. Here's what the characters look like. Go for it. And I would like that challenge. I could dig that challenge. I think I'd be up to that challenge of, you know, I don't know what I'm going to be writing this month. Just throw it at me, baby. Let me look at it. Let me see what kind of comic book I can turn this into. Because I love the medium. And I really dig, especially as I get older, I really dig Dell's style, the 6-panel grids and stuff like that. It's pure comics. There's no messing around. You know, nothing fancy, nothing splashy, just great meat and potato storytelling and solid writing. You know, and who knows? I might have gotten the right Tarzan. So one of my favorite characters. But here's a little story, because this is my channel. I can tell a little story. Ron Frenz. Now, this pertains to your question, Ajax. Ron Frenz, you should, if you're a comic reader and don't know Ron Frenz, shame on you. Just one of the top guys at Marvel, 80s, 90s, moved over to DC, did Superman. And Ron just captured that Marvel spirit. Look at this picture of Thor. You know, he just captured, he's a big fan of the same way I am of the Marvel era of the 60s. And he just captures, he just nails it. You know, he's a terrific artist, fantastic artist. And he's sort of the bastard child of John Buscema and Jack Kirby. He combines those two styles so elegantly, so naturally. Just a tremendous talent. I was lucky enough to hang out with him at a con. I think it was Pittsburgh. And I think we were like the only pros there. Or maybe it was just we were the only two people who knew each other. And I didn't really know Ron, but I knew him through Bo Smith. I knew him through Tom DeFalco. I knew of him. And I'd always heard he was a great guy. So we hung out after the con. And we wound up at a bar. And, got to talking about comics. That's the weird thing about comic guys. They can spend hours and hours together, walk away, and not know anything about each other's personal life. You know, you could spend a whole weekend with a guy at a con, walk away. No, you get home, the wife asks, well, was he married? I don't know. He's have any kids? I don't know. Where does he live? I'm not real sure. What'd you talk about? The Hulk. So we were talking, and Ron said something. He articulated something that I think every comic book creator articulates or thinks about from time to time. He thought, could I have hacked it back in the day? Could I have made it with those guys? If I was in the mix with Kirby, Buscema, Heck, and Ditko, could I have made my place? Could I have stayed in pace with those guys? And I said, well, yeah, of course you could. He goes, yeah. He said, yeah, I think I could. He says, I think I've proven that. And I said, absolutely. You keep up with a schedule. You know, you've been there doing like 2 monthlies at a time. Obviously you can do it. And obviously you have the talent. But it was kind of neat to hear what by this time was a seasoned professional still thinking about the profession, still thinking about his career in that way. So interesting. I hope you found it that way as well. Gentleman Savage, when it comes to all the Rippaverse characters you've written so far, which characters have your favorite dynamic relationship to write? For example, Alpha Core Horseman and his relationship with the family, etc. Well, you're kind of answering your own question. When you come up with these characters and they're brand new characters, and you're expected to fill in everything. You got to fill in background relationships. What is their relationship with each other? These aren't just characters. They've got to seem integrated with the rest of the cast. They're not just saying stuff, randomly, like some comics I read. It seems like some comics I read, it's like they watched an episode of Friends, wrote down all the dialogue on slips of paper, threw them on the floor, and picked them up randomly to put in the word balloons for their characters. No, you want to have like natural dialogue and everything else, and you can't have that unless you figured out the relationships that go along. I kind of do it organically. It's like, what do I need these characters to be to each other? Do they respect each other? Do they like each other? Do they annoy each other? Whatever. And kind of go from there. But at Rippa, I guess my favorite is the Horseman. And he seems to be the favorite of all the things I've created for Rippa. And you kind of answered your own question, because I do like his relationship with his sister and his nephew. I kind of dig that. I like writing those scenes, because she's always giving him crap, and he's always taking it, because he's generally always wrong. And I don't want to do the stupid guy thing and all the rest of it, but, she's doing this out of love. I mean, she cares about him, and she sees him constantly getting, physically hurt. She knows he's kind of struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder. She knows he's struggling with finding a purpose in life and engaging himself in this weird world of a vigilante crime fighter, because he's kind of sees that as filling a void in his life that is left empty once he left the military. And he doesn't feel like he's good at anything else. And he really needs that home life. And he really needs to be grounded. And his love for his sister and his love for his nephew keep him that way. But boy, she doesn't give an inch. And a lot of this is that he's going to have to prove to her that what he's doing is noble. It isn't just, that he's an action junkie or, whatever. So yeah, it's an evolving, all these relationships should be evolving. If you're writing characters, they should always be evolving. There should always be questions. There should still be questions between Clark Kent and Lois Lane. What is that? Where does that relationship really stand? You never want to go status quo and that kind of stuff. But there you go. Twin spin. Ba-boom. Okay. Gentle Savage is back with, also, have you ever read Mark Waid's Kingdom Come? If so, what do you think about Waid's future versions of all the different classic DC superheroes in that story? The answer is no. The main reason I didn't read it, and we were all told to read it because I was working at DC at the time. We were told it was very, very important. We all read this book. It turned out not to be all that important. At this time, I was reading Mark Waid. I was reading everything that came out from him. I was getting comps. And I would pick Mark Waid's books out and read them. At that time, I was really enjoying his writing. But I didn't read this because I don't like Alex Ross's art. I'm sorry. It doesn't feel like comics to me. It doesn't look like comics to me. It looks like little paintings with word balloons on them. It doesn't move. I can't see the hand. I mean, he's not a cartoonist. He's not really a comic book artist. He's an illustrator. And I don't like it. Not to say that fully finished painted comics can't be comics. Rich Corbin made a career out of it. But Rich Corbin was a cartoonist. Rich Corbin had lots of mojo. And I see a lot of hand. I see a lot of craft in Alex Ross. Don't see a lot of mojo. So, so I just had no interest in reading this. Sorry to Alex Ross fans. I'm just not, not into it. Garrett Davis. With the firing of Mike Richardson from Dark Horse, I was curious if you had ever met him. What do you think of him? Having seen him in a handful of documentaries, he seemed like a great guy and was willing to take chances on new artists with new ideas. Yeah, I met Mike Richardson a bunch of times at cons, especially when he was first starting out. Man, I can't remember the name. He had a partner back then. And I remember, Dark Horse was a little company and they didn't have that many titles out. And if I remember right, they were all in black and white and nobody thought they were going to last very long. But then Mike took a gamble and he licensed the Alien franchise, which apparently cost him a fortune to license. And that put them on the map. The original Alien series drawn by Mark Nelson, went through the ceiling. It was a comic no one knew they wanted, but as soon as they saw it, they said, I got to have that. And everybody bought it. Everybody read it. Huge success. And then he was off to the races. I mean, he was able to cover the fee for the licensing and build upon that until, eventually he became, quite the Hollywood player with, several successful movies and all the rest of it. And he built, kind of a loose fitting universe of characters, and we end up with, Hellboy, The Mask, other things, which really had legs in ancillary media. So, he was smart. He was like the first guy, really the first independent publisher to really go after the Hollywood thing and make himself a part of it. I mean, not just license his characters, but serve in a role as producer, sometimes actually putting Dark Horse's own money into productions for TV and movies. And, generally a good guy. I didn't do a lot of work at Dark Horse, mainly because of personalities, not Mike Richardson's personality. I don't think Mike Richardson cared one way or the other about me, but he had an editor. I got a little work at Dark Horse, and then they hired an editor who was sort of my, bête noire, and I didn't get any work while that editor was there. And then as soon as that editor left, I got more work from Dark Horse. So mystery solved. And I did quite a bit of work for Dark Horse, particularly in the area of crossovers. And I always appreciated Dave Land was usually my editor. I loved working with him. And he was always, anxious to find new crossover projects for me and encouraging crossover projects for me to do between DC and Dark Horse. More so than DC. DC hated doing licensed properties because of all the legal stuff they had to do. But Dark Horse, made a lot of hay off of crossovers because they understood crossovers bring new readers. Something DC never really understood. No, why Mike's out? I hope he got a golden parachute. I hope he left there with a whole bunch of cash. I wish him the best. Maybe he'll start another company. Who knows? Or maybe he'll just kick back somewhere. I would, sit by the pool, catch some rays, spend time with the family if he has a family. Once again, I don't know anything about Mike Richardson's family. I don't know anything about almost anybody's family that I work with. But yeah, good guy. From everything I hear, I never had that much business with him. But Mike Barron says he was awesome, so I'm gonna say he was awesome or is awesome to this day. Eli Zimmerman, did you ever read the comics adaptations of novels done by Classics Illustrated? If so, do you remember any that stood out? Do you think it worked to make children more inclined to read the novels on which they were based? Do you think that would work now? Yeah, they were around. They had their own spin rack at the drugstore, at our local drugstore. They're separate from the newsstand where the comics, the grody little, superhero comic books would be. You had this separate spin rack for Classics Illustrated. And Classics Illustrated were a little larger. Somewhere in the early 60s, they shrank the size of a comic a little bit. But Classics didn't. Classics were still the same size as a Golden Age comic, which was interesting. And I read a bunch because you'd go to people's houses and they'd be laying around because of the main function of Classics Illustrated, which was to cheat on book reports at school. If you were asked to write a book report and you were, on the football team, you weren't going to read that book. So you got yourself a Classics Illustrated. There were a number of times I ran down to the drugstore because, older guys in my neighborhood knew that I was into comics. And they said, could you find me the Classics Illustrated of this, Tale of Two Cities? And I'm like, okay, I'll see if I can find it, which gave me an excuse to run around the drugstores, and they'd give me a quarter, which left at the time, a dime over to buy a comic of my own. So, so I was like the gopher for Classics Illustrated. Now, of ones that I liked, there's only one I really liked that I bought for myself, which was War of the Worlds. I'm a sucker for space invasion stuff. And this one's a pretty good one. It's pretty good. And all these adaptations by Classics Illustrated are faithful, which is what made them valuable for book reports. But this one I liked. I remember reading and rereading it, or just opening it up to look at the pictures, soldiers fighting the Martians. And it's pretty cool. I can't remember who drew it. And they usually had a bunch of artists working. A lot of times, Classics Illustrated, the whole thing wasn't by the same artist working through. It would be by a team of artists working in their house style. So even if they hired like John Severin or Reed Crandall to work on the story, or George Evans, it's kind of buried under a kind of a tame house style, which is why I didn't really read them as comics. Now, I actually wrote a Classics Illustrated when First Comics got the license for Classics Illustrated in the 80s. I did an adaptation of Call of the Wild with Ricardo Villagrán. Hey, what about that? Ricardo gets 2 mentions here and 2 answers. And this was cool. This was really cool. Although, man, editing Jack London down to 48 pages was tough, because I wanted to keep all the good stuff. I wanted to keep that great scene where they have a contest to see who can break the sled out of the ice fastest. And I wanted to include all of that. But so I have worked in that area. Do I think they're valuable? Yeah, why not? It's great material, especially if you have a bravura artist doing the adaptation instead of like a staid, dry house style, something to visually bring it forward to interest the kids. Eye candy. It's all about eye candy. Joshua Ignatowski, of course it's Joshua Ignatowski. He just won't go away. And we don't want him to, because he comes up with questions like this. When coming up with ideas for new superpowers in your career, what's been your process of coming up with powers that were unique from all the ones that had been seen in comics before? I'm guessing one way a new superpower can be created is by changing the mechanics of how an existing power works so it has new aesthetics, requirements, and or weaknesses than it did before. I don't really think that much about the powers. There's a list of stuff that a hero can do. That's cool. That's wish fulfillment thinking. Flying, being a tough guy, being able to see through walls, being really fast, having a magic ring, whatever it is, it's wish fulfillment. Now you got to make a character that's compelling to go along with it. And you got to figure out the levels of their power, what's their weakness, if they have one, and all the rest of it. But you have these like really specific characters like the Flash. We have the Flash, we have Quicksilver, we have the Wizard, we have umpty versions of the Flash. There's a speedster character in the Rippaverse, because why wouldn't there be? That I'm looking to put kind of a twist on, something a little different, something nobody's ever done with a character like this before. But I obviously don't want to reveal what that is. And a lot of that is going on in the Rippaverse. Where do these powers come from? A lot of these are genetic in the Rippaverse. Some, if you're reading Great War of Separation, you'll know, are deliberately created by science in sort of a wacky military experiment, a la Captain America. And, but sometimes just the guy who can fly and is strong is enough. Brian Solari in Alpha Corps is kind of Captain Marvel in that way. He can fly and he's strong, and he's smart and he's tough. So, now the problem comes is when you have a character who has sort of a passive power, they don't last very long. You got Invisible Girl and you got Marvel Girl. And I really think that Marvel Girl, what happened with Marvel Girl with Chris Claremont and John Byrne is that they realized this character is so useless compared to the rest of the X-Men, whose powers are very specific and visceral, and they're strong, they're dangerous. And Marvel Girl was kind of, she can move stuff with her mind. And they thought, well, this character's really come to the end of its story. But rather than just knock her off and get her out of the team, they came up with one of the most memorable American comic book stories of all time to basically end her story. And sometimes that's what you got to do. And I really think that the powers given to her by Stan and Jack, lent itself to that story, because this character was good. She was just going to be an ancillary, kind of useless character over time. And yeah, she had this, love interest, and you had the soap opera aspects because you got a girl in the group, but she's being eclipsed by far more powerful female characters, and would it be eclipsed further? Characters like Storm and Rogue and stuff like that, kind of made her superfluous. But instead of just knocking her off because she was not interesting to write anymore, Claremont and Byrne turned a liability into an asset and ended her story in an epic way that, I think almost everybody listening or watching here has read and enjoyed. That was a hell of a story that those two guys cooked up, all based on her powers and how lame they were. Twin spin. Of course, Joshua's back again with, how was your experience at MegaCon? Was there anything in particular you found enjoyable about hitting the convention scene again for the first time in a while? Yeah, MegaCon here in Orlando, Florida. Once I got there, it was good. Man, Orlando traffic. I decided I hate Orlando as much as I hate LA for a lot of the same reasons. And I had fun meeting people. I didn't, get to see a whole lot because I was mostly sitting down signing comics at the Rippaverse booth. And I was there, I guess I was doing that for about 6 hours. Had a panel that went well. But it was fun meeting people. I got to shake Zachary Levy's hand. That was cool. And I got to see Eric and Caro and Anthony and Andrew and all those guys again, which is fun. I love the Ripper crew. Love hanging out with them. And met a lot of fans who took a lot of selfies, who put them up on Facebook so I could show them to you here. And there's Vaughn Coleman. Seems like a highly energetic dude. And then I probably should have left after the signing, but then I went over and hung out with my pal Sergio. He was over in Artist Alley hawking his Action Bibles and doing very well. And then he and my son, and I was there only Saturday. He and my son and I went out to dinner that night. Had a terrific dinner at a Colombian steakhouse. And it was good. And then got up the next morning, packed up, came home. So it was good. Not in a rush to do another one. So don't expect to see me hitting the con trail anytime soon in any kind of consistent way. So here's a segment I'm calling Told You So. I posted on social media that I thought that the James Gunn era was over, has been over for months. Caught a lot of flack for it. What do you know? You hate James Gunn. I don't hate James Gunn. I don't care about James Gunn one way or another. But these people talking about what James Gunn is going to do next, and James Gunn's going to do this, and James Gunn's going to do that. All of James Gunn's projects are canceled. They're either canceled or, as a studio exec said, they're not on the runway. Which means they're canceled. And a lot of people think this is because the Skydance, Paramount, bought Warner's. It's not. He was canceled before that. He was done before that because you weren't seeing anything from Warner's about his upcoming projects. The only references to James Gunn in social media and in PR was coming from James Gunn. And then it was coming from fan sites. What's he going to do next? And they had no answers because he's not going to be doing anything next for DC. The Superman, nothing against the guy. I've got nothing against the guy. But the Superman movie underperformed. Warner's was really counting on that. Warner's was basically let the world know, if this Superman movie isn't the number one movie of the summer, of the year, we're going to put the company up for sale. I mean, they just let that out. And that's why Netflix and Skydance were warring over who was going to own Warner's next, because they basically said, look, we're open for sale because we really, we don't know what to do next. If we can't make a Superman movie make money, maybe somebody else should be running this outfit. And James Gunn couldn't do that. The Peacemaker, I never watched it, don't care one way or the other, but apparently he ticked off all the fans of Peacemaker with the current season, and they canceled the next one. And then they began one by one to cancel projects, and the projects they didn't cancel, they simply said weren't on the schedule. Now that's a Hollywood goodbye. The Hollywood goodbye is they don't tell you you're fired. They tell you you're great, you're wonderful, you're fantastic, but they just don't ever do anything. None of your projects move forward, and eventually you get the idea, hey, maybe I'm not wanted around here anymore. So nothing against James Gunn, but the James Gunn era is over. There's no way he's coming back from this. There's no way they're suddenly going to announce he's in charge again. And all of these things are back on the schedule. His slate of projects, it's done, it's over. They tried it. It didn't work. He's off, probably back to Marvel, where, he had a lot more success. Let's be frank. So, hate to say I told you so, but I told you so. And, news over the next month or so will bear this out. I promise you. Curriculo. No, back to our regularly scheduled program. Curriculo, new question asker, says, now you could correct me if I'm overstating this a bit. Probably the second greatest impact you and Graham as a team had in the Batman mythos as a whole, after the creation of Bane, of course, was the character rework you guys did for the Penguin. On the number 683 and number 684 issues of Detective, since every version of the character since, be it in the comics themselves, the cartoons, animated movies, video games, and now both a live-action movie and an award-winning miniseries, have adapted your suave gangster Sidney Greenstreet type version of the character. My question would be, what was the whole process around the reinvention of the character? What did Denny think? What was your inspiration for the plot of the story itself? Since people generally overlook it, which is unfortunate to me because I like it very much. And lastly, what do you think of the subsequent adaptations if you follow them? Yeah, I was working on Detective Comics. I'm in the mix with Batman. I can use any, legendary villain I want to use. And I wanted to get it around to the Penguin. I'd done everybody, just about. Not Clayface, because I don't get Clayface. But I'd done Man-Bat, Joker, Riddler, Catwoman. Just about a Killer Croc, just about everybody else. But I avoided Penguin because I never got the character. Even as a kid, I never got the character. He's this chubby little guy. He's bird themed, and his stories weren't particularly memorable. He didn't seem to be that much of a mastermind. He was more of a nuisance than anything else. And of course, in a straight up fight with Batman, he wouldn't last 2 seconds. So what could I do with the Penguin that would make for an interesting Penguin story? And so I proposed at the next Bat Summit that we kind of not change the Penguin, but change his role in the Gotham City underworld. I said, what if, it makes a lot more sense if this guy was a fixer. If he was a guy who, owned a club, like Bogart did in Casablanca. And if you needed to get out of town or you had hot merchandise to sell, he could handle that for you. If two mobs were at loggerheads over something, instead of going into a gang war, they'd go to the Penguin, have him be an intermediary between them. This guy was like a behind the scenes. And also he'd be a player. Creepy little guy who thinks he's got game with women. And because he's got money, he does have game with women. And I presented this at the Bat Summit. And just as you said, I presented him as a Sidney Greenstreet character. Sidney Greenstreet was this overweight British actor who appeared in tons of Warner Brothers movies, and often in the role of a fixer, of a guy in the background, a guy, the puppeteer, moving things around, manipulating people. And he had like this sort of, oily style to him, and, continental flair. And Denny liked the idea. I didn't get a whole lot of response from Alan and Denny, and Alan and Doug, but I often didn't. They could be sphinxes at the Bat Summits, to tell you the truth. But I presented this, and so I wrote a story, and he's part Sidney Greenstreet, and he's also, I didn't tell Denny this part, partly inspired by Burgess Meredith's interpretation of the Penguin as a womanizer. I think because that's very much an aspect of this new, not rebooted, not reinvented, this new repurposed Penguin. I don't change anything about him. I just give him a better role in the world. And so, we roll this out, and, I give him the Iceberg Lounge, a Arctic themed place to hang out, and, with lots of penguins, stuffed ones. And it clicks. And the guys on the animated show like it, and the readers like it, and now Penguin has a new role. And that's kind of cool. It's kind of cool that Graham and I had that kind of influence on the Batman mythos. And it is the second most influential thing we did after Bane. It's our most significant contribution. And of course, it led to the movie and TV people taking a second look at the character and thinking, hey, there's stuff we can do here. This character's kind of dopey before. Now he's kind of cool. He's kind of cool. So, and I should mention, to be fair, DC's been pretty generous in sharing cash based on these ideas. We've received checks when they've used these concepts from the miniseries, from his appearance in the movie, and stuff like that. So, we're good. But thank you for pointing that out. It's one of my proudest contributions to Batman is figuring out how to make the Penguin work in today. BrunoBookstore@gmail.com, BrunoBookstore@gmail.com. If you got awesome questions like the people asked this week, you want to go right there to that email and jump all over it, because it's the most reliable way of getting a hold of me. And while I still have you, Storming Paradise is coming out, miniseries by Butch Geis and I, about the invasion of Japan in 1946 that didn't happen, but very nearly did. And it was a miniseries from Wildstorm a while back, but it is going to be reprinted by Graham Nolan's Compass Comics in a brand new hardcover edition as the second volume of giant-sized two-fisted manly tales. And you should check it out. You should check it out. I will have the link below, of course, and you can go over and take a look. It's me and Butch Geis doing a project we really had a lot of passion for. And it didn't get seen by a lot of people, but now is your chance to own it in this deluxe hardcover edition. And this is one of the variant covers. It's an excellent cover by Graham Nolan. He's really channeling Joe Kubert here. Nice stuff. Okay, that's it for me. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking and subscribing. And I will see all of you, hopefully, down the road.